slide deck. My presentation is not going to be anywhere near as technical as the rest of the presentations that you're going to see today. Mine is an overview of the video ecosystem and the evolution toward 2020. So even though I got a couple more minutes from the last announcement, because I planned on having some questions and answers at the tail end, I'm still going to go very fast. So if I start going a little too rapidly, please let me know. So as this is a forecast presentation, I'm curious, how many of you guys have seen this slide before or something similar to it? This is from Ray Kurzweil, Singularity. Okay, I figured that this audience would have seen this slide before, so I'm not going to talk about it in too much detail, but the fundamentals are important, right? So still, the fact that Moore's Law is leading to larger and larger jumps in the amount of computing power that we can achieve in a 1 square inch or however you want to calculate it, means so much drastic change is going to happen rapidly. From JR this morning, he talked about the pace of change, and I think every other speaker, with maybe the exception of a couple, talked about how rapidly pace is changing. And this is the root cause of how the rate of change is increasing. So I do have a question about the Singularity event. So if you've read any of Kurzweil, so Ray Kurzweil is, his title is Futurist at Google. So it sounds like a pretty cool job to have. But he has a whole university out here, as a matter of fact. CEOs from Fortune 500 companies come out to Singularity University, and they talk about the effects of Moore's Law and what that's going to do to their industries. And from what I hear, I'm friends with one of the Deloitte partners who comes out here and works on it. Says about the first 2.5 days of the process is spent calming the CEOs down so they can relax and start thinking about how they're going to deal with this, because they freak out about how their business is going to stay relevant over the next 5 years or 10 years, given these types of activities going on. So the Singularity event is supposed to be very Terminator-like, and when the machines become self-aware and what's going to happen at that point. So I don't know if a singularity is going to happen, but the only thing I do know is that the pace of change is going to keep on increasing. And so what does this mean for the video market? So this is the topic of the discussion, right? The accelerating pace of change for content sources and content bandwidth just going to explode, which is the whole reason why. And then the next slide will show some numbers around the bandwidth explosion, the exponential rate of the bandwidth explosion. So I have the YouTube picture there. Is anybody doing Periscope or Meerkat at this event? I was kind of wondering if anybody was going to be doing that. Some other events there would be people doing it. So this represents the user-generated content, and with every one of us has a smartphone. So with everyone in the developed country basically having a studio quality camera, I put the iPhone 7 up there because the iPhone 7 is rumored to have a HD camera embedded. There are already some devices. I think Samsung has a device out there with an HD camera. So with everybody in the developed world holding a studio quality camera in their hand, you can imagine the amount of bandwidth that's going to use. Matter of fact, I say studio quality. There was a recent episode of Modern Family that was filmed completely with iPhone cameras. So that's the level of quality that we've gotten out of miniaturization, another effect of Moore's Law. The next picture I have below that is, this is actually a screenshot from some brand-produced content. This is an Alcatel-Lucent piece called The New Guy at the Office, and it was a series of 4 or 5 10-minute vignettes about a new CIO arriving at a large company, and we produced this piece. We also produced another piece with our Motive product. The most famous examples of these are Red Bull with their extreme sports and Marriott Hotels. So I stayed at the Marriott next door last night. Marriott Hotels has a whole channel devoted to luxury lifestyles. So the brands are getting more into content generation. There's a funny story about Patagonia went to one of their content producers and said, hey, we're thinking about getting into the content business. Can you help us? And the reply from the other side of the table was, hey, I'm thinking about getting in the jacket business. Can you help us? So you're starting to see this tension between the content producers and the brands. The next topic up there, Vice, is a multi-channel media player. One of the best ones. That now it's not even just all online. HBO is starting to use some of the Vice documentaries, but Vice is showing people. It started off as a lifestyle brand kind of page, but it's become heavily involved in news generation. It showed the news media how the younger generation will watch the news. They just won't watch a talking head talking about the news. They want to see things going on out in the field. And Vice showed people how to do not only that, but they showed a business model very similar to the NPR model where there's no advertising involved. You don't have to subscribe to it, but it'll say this piece is brought to you by Samsung. Actually produced one of their more popular pieces. Anybody FaceTime their family last night? Anything like that? I did. Right. So if you're in this, I put Skype up there as an example of video calling. So if you're in this room and you're an American and you're under 35, chances are you make at least one video call per month. If you're a Brazilian, no matter how old you are, chances are you make at least one video call per month. So the video calling, which was, there were bits that were dedicated to video calling in the T1 standard. I'm an engineer, I'm very familiar with the T1 standard. That never got used except in a World's Fair here and there. But once TCP/IP came around, that became the protocol for putting video calling over the as a feature, as a service that people could use, which is funny because TCP/IP is a horrible protocol for video, but that's what ended up taking off. Again, Moore's Law, helping the computing power to produce this. I used to have a picture here, just like the one that says 8K here, that says 4K above it. So it's kind of like here's some next generation HD coming down the pipe, but it's not next generation anymore. So the screenshot at the top with the horse and the supermodel, that was filmed that was broadcast by DirecTV during the NCAA March Madness events this year. So they're showing off that they have 4K content available. Netflix has 4K content. I think Amazon has some 4K content. It's now easier to buy a 4K ready television than a standard HD, say standard, but a 1K HD television. At CES in January, there were 2 1K HD TVs that were on the floor. All the rest of the models were either 4K or 8K, and 8K is coming. So all this video content, heavier bandwidth consumption by the produced content ends up with a bandwidth curve that looks something like this. So this is a chart that was produced by Bell Labs. And you can see, again, the exponential rate of bandwidth that's being consumed. And obviously, we're all in this room because we understand the fact that the regulated spectrum is not going to be sufficient to handle the amount of bandwidth that people are going to want to consume. Particularly, the vast majority of this is video. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But even on our low estimate, which just shows the 8K TV plus some cloud delivery of the content, that gets us over 2.5 times the bandwidth that's produced today by 2020. You start adding on things like the Internet of Things, machine to machine. I think we call it immersive. Here, it's the concept of what's it called? The enhanced augmented reality. So augmented reality type of activities, and you start to get almost 4.5 times the amount of bandwidth that's consumed today. If you want these slides, I can give them to you. You guys don't need to take pictures of the slides. This is actually out there in the public domain, but I can get you pictures of these slides, or I can get you the whole deck. All right, and so now as far as video consumption is concerned, and this might be a little dated, especially for this audience, you guys are early adopters, I'm sure, but let's say 2 years ago, this is what the video ecosystem looked like from a business perspective, right? So all the edges were very well defined, and we have content sources being delivered linearly, but everybody along that value chain kind of knew their place. But then came OTT content, and now you got this drip of yellow liquid into my nice blue pool, and what ends up happening is you get this green pool of liquid. I'm not sure what shade of green it is now, depending on how many services you have at your house, and you see the edges start getting real fuzzy, and it's particularly at this juncture. Nobody really knows what this model is going to look like as people are experimenting, and I'll get to some hard numbers on this in a second. But we all know what the end state is going to be, right? The end state is a combination of services that end up with any content delivered to any device at any time. We all know it's going to end up like that. The question is, how long is it going to take? And for individual service providers, how do you get from where you are today? Whether you're offering a full linear service today or you're just thinking about doing a full over-the-top service within the next couple of years, how do you get from where you are today to the any content, any device at any time vision of the future? And mobility has become table stakes for these. So here I have the 1Q Uyala data from their Global Video Index, whatever they call it. The 2Q data is out, so I need to update this slide, and it shows that over 50% of the video downloads go to a mobile device. Google, in their last quarterly report, showed that over 50% of the YouTube downloads go to a mobile device. So mobile is obviously a big part of this. That's the number of downloads, it's not the number of minutes, because I'll get to where long-form content goes. The other picture I have out here, and I had this story confirmed by my friends at KT that are out there in the vendor area. This is a picture of a screenshot of a South Korean soap opera. So like the telenovelas in Latin American countries, South Koreans really like their soap operas, but there's another aspect of their life, and it's that they work very, very hard. So if you ever see these charts of how many hours people work per week on a per country basis, South Korea is always up toward the top of this list. So they don't have time to watch their soap operas. So what the content rights owners have done is shorten down the content of their hour-long soap opera to a 10-minute highlights, so you can see whose evil twin stabbed who in the back while you're riding the subway home. Right? So now you're starting to see things so that the content rights owners are changing their model to fit the lifestyle of the consumers. And this is really interesting. Like if you've ever been, HBO has their servers at AT&T's Uverse, they call it the Show. It's locked behind a gated server. The only HBO has the key, and I think they were forced to give the key to whoever the fire marshal is or whoever's in charge of safety in that building. But they don't like anybody messing with their content anyway. And now you're starting to see people adjusting the content to fit the lifestyle of the consumer. So I think that's an interesting development. I usually go through this slide, but with the build-up, so we can get some dramatic flair added to it. But in the interest of time on this slide, I wanted to put some perspective around the OTT revenue sources. So revenue enters the video ecosystem in two ways, either from subscriptions or from advertising. And you can see from this slide that the linear services dwarf the OTT services, particularly today. OTT subscriptions are about less than 10% of what linear subscriptions are. This is worldwide data, not US data, this is global. OTT has a little bit more on the advertising side because a lot of their models are based on that. Hulu, not Hulu Plus, which has a subscription, but Hulu, YouTube, all of those are heavily advertising supported. And people say, okay, well, OTT is growing so fast. Well, I jumped forward and I ruined the surprise here. And I got 2018 data. One of my data sources doesn't go all the way up to 2020. So I have a question mark on the takeaway here. By 2020, will OTT revenues surpass linear? I don't know. It doesn't look like it's going to get there. It's happening so rapidly. The growth in OTT services is happening so rapidly, but there are a couple inhibitors to this. The primary inhibitor, and one inhibitor is the fact that the linear service operators are able to offer things like cloud DVRs and catch-up TV and other types of products that make a decent facsimile of the other OTT services. But the bigger inhibitor is the content rights owner. So we look at the linear subscription revenues that come in. The vast majority of those go to the content rights owners. I don't think any operator in the US at least is making a gross margin that's above 30% anymore. It used to be the big ones had in the 35–40% range. And now it's been squeezed and squeezed and squeezed because the content rights owners, content is king in this market, and the cost of the content is increasing much faster than the rate of technology can be lowered to deliver the content. So the content rights owners at this juncture really have all of the big pile, and they're getting parts of the little pile. And there's no way that they're going to substitute or provide their content to someone who's going to only give them the little pile, right? So once people get the business models figured out as to how the content rights owners are going to be able to still capture the amount of revenue that they're capturing under the current system, then we're going to see a lot of proliferation of OTT content. I mean, Reed Hastings said by 2020, he did this a couple days ago, by 2025, all the content will be streamed. But since he runs Netflix, he kind of has a vested interest in saying something like that. But 2025 is probably a good guess, right? I would say not by 2020, but by 2025 seems like a good forecast. That being said, on the mobility and OTT content, TV is still the preferred choice of device to watch content, all forms of long form. And then what's surprising here is that even short form content, it's not the smartphone or the tablet, it's the PC. So I thought that was an interesting a little twist there. And now let's get to the big takeaway for you guys. The network matters significantly. I used to show a chart for this particular graph that showed after 2 minutes that most people would abandon trying to download a particular piece of video. But I find this one more interesting. This is data that's collected from people who are binge viewers. So they're definitely going to watch an entire season of Downton Abbey in a weekend. If their quality of service is poor after the first 4 minutes it shows here, they're gone. And they're gone for good. So if you're thinking about running an OTT service, if you got some excellent content that you know people are going to love, and your network's no good, you're never going to see any kind of take-up of your service because just what this chart shows. And we see with Sling, they tried this. So Sling obviously has a CDN, but it wasn't robust enough. During the NCAA Final Four, the semifinal games, their network blew up. Same thing happened to ESPN overseas. They offered ESPN Go for the World Cup, not in the US, but they offered it overseas. World Cup comes around, some games get played, their network blows up. A lot of unhappy customers. And speaking of unhappy customers, right, the number one reason for churn is poor quality of experience. So 70% of the customers say that they leave because they have poor quality of experience. And 90% of customers say they have a poor quality of experience with video every day. So 90% of people say they have poor quality of experience with video, and 70% of the reason they leave, if you're a service provider, 70% of the reason they leave your company and go to another company is because they have poor quality of experience. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. So thinking about what you're going to do with your network is really, really important, especially as video becomes more and more of the service that's offered across the wireless networks. And then finally, this is another slide. It's really targeted toward the service providers. It's still a good time to be in the video service world. The TV is still the preferred device for consuming content. So a lot of that focuses on Wi-Fi in the house or even fixed in the house. OTT technology is for the current linear service providers as well. There's no reason why they can't offer the same type of services. I mentioned some examples of that they do that already. The network, the data that you get from there, and this is one of the more interesting things that I think about this whole any device to any content, or any content to any device at any time, is the concept of search and discovery. If you walk to your house tonight and you said, I can watch any content that I want, and then, okay, now I got to make a decision. What do I want to watch? Maybe if you're not a sports fan and there's a game on that night, which you're going to watch, in a multicast kind of world. So we talk about all unicast. So there's still going to be multicast. The Super Bowl is going to be multicast. The Academy Awards will be multicast. The Voice will be multicast. Things that people like to consume in real time. But if you had that option, I can watch anything I want. How do you figure out what you're going to watch? Right. So we all know about Netflix and their advisory algorithms. But if you're a network, a provider of linear services, chances are, we have data that shows this, chances are that you're also providing wireless service or the home broadband service. So you have a lot more data about that end user than Netflix does. And perhaps in places where privacy laws allow this and you don't get too creepy with what you're suggesting, and we have a lot of data on that as well. But say you know that a particular individual just spent 2 hours in traffic driving from San Francisco down to San Jose, and when they get home, they're going to be in a particular type of mood. So the last time that this happened, this was the kind of content this consumer liked to consume. Now you can provide that search and discovery. So there's a lot of things that a service provider can do around search and discovery that a pure play OTT provider cannot do.